So hi, welcome to Anchor Reviews. This is Tyler from Anchor Reviews.
And Steven, aka the Big Steve, on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok.
Alright, so 10 years ago this month, or at least by the time this video comes out, Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens came out, and while it made over $2 billion at the box office and began the Star Wars movies by Disney, it's a movie that a lot of people would say is a movie that doesn't really hold up as much as it once did. A lot of people loved it at the time, but there's people who have criticized it throughout the years, and people have defended it as well. And I think the reason why people have looked back on it iffy is that you've had the other movies that have come afterwards. And I would say that the whole sequel trilogy definitely had a lot of problems with it, which I'll explain in this video. So in this video, I'm going to explain what I think are the top 10 worst things about the Star Wars sequel trilogy. And I know the Star Wars prequels have their problems, but I tend to enjoy those more, not just because I grew up watching those movies in theaters, but at least they were from the creator of Star Wars, George Lucas, who had somewhat of a plan, and while the plan did change a bit here and there, they are consistent in terms of a vision and the story that he wanted to tell. But with the sequel trilogy, you can't really say the same with that. But also before I continue is that, and speaking of the Star Wars prequels, I did this video, at least Steven chimed in throughout my points I was trying to make on the Star Wars prequels, why they're better than you remember, and how red letter media's videos on those movies did hurt the Star Wars franchise. And I did anticipate all the comments I got in that video by people who are just RLM fanboys, just saying like, oh, I didn't like it, and obviously I could tell they didn't watch the whole video from start to finish. I mean, some of them did, but a lot of them I could tell obviously didn't watch the video and just made a comment to disagree and like dislike the video. And I do sympathize with these people because they just mentally are stuck in 2012. They never really evolved past that. They never looked to develop their own critical thinking skills. And just looking at the critiques of the Star Wars prequels in the way that RLM did, or more specifically Mike Solska did, it really does go to show that having too much college is a real thing.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. I'm not quite sure I would describe it as an issue of college, but the thing that is more at play that I think any institution or any just group that gets too comfortable being in its own bubble, which is a phenomenon we're seeing more and more these days in different areas of life because of social media, but it's existed longer than that, and it is this sort of archetype of person that just gets comfortable finding their niche, mastering in a sort of mimic-like way, parroting basically old, uninspired takes and basically orthodoxy for things like writing and filmmaking and just creative endeavors, and acting like that is not only their own personal take, but that you're wrong for challenging it at all ever. And while I think in some fields where it's more understandable for, I don't know, like you wouldn't want people screwing around with nuclear fusion willy-nilly. With art and stuff like that, in theory, the goal of college and university and education is to challenge and grow and like expand and interconnect different areas of the culture. And so to have this just ravenous gatekeeping is, while it's understandable, it is a very juvenile and unproductive way of handling things like this. And that's not to, make Star Wars the center of art or discourse, but it is a good window in which to examine how this sort of clash between culture and academic and artistic standards kind of coexist with corporate consolidation and the decline of risk through sort of profit-seeking ventures. It is an ongoing battle that has gone on for a long time and will continue to. And we're entering an era where it seems like the avenues, despite media being more accessible than ever, the means of making good media, and having a platform to show that to more people and have it be noticed seems to be increasingly sparse because of this sort of gatekeeping philosophy that we see. So that's kind of my intro spiel to it.
All right, so at number 10, the Reylo romance. So Kylo Ren established to be this bad person. He kills his father right in front of Rey, who grew somewhat attached to Han Solo. And then there's a little bit of a hint of some kind of connection with them in The Last Jedi. And then they're kind of antagonistic in most of Rise of Skywalker. But then they just randomly kiss towards the end before he dies. And it was just there to appease the shippers, who are people who just wanted to sell merchandise of Kylo Ren and Rey. And it was just so forced and cringe. And yeah, it's just definitely dates the movie, and it's just random. Didn't make a whole lot of sense logically. And yeah, that's why I would say, yeah, definitely in the top 10, but it's kind of low on the list for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. You're telling me you wouldn't want to kiss this big-nosed monkey? No, I'm sure Tyler can include an image, but that's what comes to my mind with Kylo. And in the first of the sequel trilogy, I actually thought, before he took his mask off, maybe we can do something cool here with the whole Darth Vader legacy and dear incel forums, fanboy of Kylo as, worshipping his uncle, basically. But, or I guess it would be grandfather. Yeah, grandfather. But, so the Reylo romance, I definitely agree that was cringe, deviant art tier stuff of the shippers. And kind of along those lines, I feel that the Finn and Rey romantic subplot was just completely wasted as well. So like both angles of it just didn't feel comprehensive or organic. I think as most aspects of it like the sequel trilogy, it started okay in the part 7. I'm already forgetting the name, but
Force Awakens, because it was such a copy and paste of the original start of the original trilogy.
But it just did not work. They lost their way so quickly, which I'm sure will be a theme that we repeat in many different parts and themes. But it just did not work for me. Kind of along those lines, Kylo as a character who was set up to kind of be the rival / big bad. He had a lot of potential in the start, and by the end of the first movie, I just was not buying that this was going to be a very competent rival, and it got worse as time went on. And so that kind of gets into one of my bigger issues, which I'll talk about Rey later. But the romances did not sell it, and I think Rose was thrown in there for Finn just to have a side piece for him to theoretically be hey, you want her? And it just none of it worked. None of the relationships worked. It's also bad because I think there were people even trying to fan ship, are Finn and Poe gonna be a thing or something? And no, that was stupid from the start, and you're just reaching. But it shows how poorly managed the romantic chemistry at all went in it. And I think some of that also has to do with the time being a very, woke period of women don't need no man. So it's that's fine, but then why even bother hinting a romantic plot at all? If you're just gonna repeatedly misdirect it and shoot it in the foot.
All right, so at number 9 would be the Casino Planet subplot. So seeing this in the theater during that moment when Finn and Rose were riding around that one, I don't know, discount, The Last Guardian or whoever it was kind of thing. And seeing that moment, I'm this did not feel like Star Wars to me. It felt like a subplot just to pad the runtime at best, and at worst for basically the writer and director of the movie to have like a anti-capitalist message that he was crowbarred into the movie itself. And yeah, it just didn't feel like Star Wars, this whole Casino Planet.
Yeah, to be honest, I can't even remember in the story what the context of why they were there was. Like, I do remember the start of the movie having that hilariously, like, especially for it being a piece of culture that was trying to be culturally aware and sensitive during this time period of woke sensibilities and stuff like that. How hilariously insensitive it was for them to start with what looked like Asian people kamikaze piloting into Imperial vessels, and I was just like, are you kidding me? We're just gonna ignore the fact that we're starting this way? Yeah, there's nothing problematic about that. I can't read anything into that.
Yeah, I remember we were like dying laughing when that happened. I was like, what's so funny, Stephen? And then you were explaining to me, and then I started laughing pretty hard too.
Yeah, it's just I couldn't believe it, like the audacity of it.
So at number 8, it's a tie between the Holdo maneuver and Rose crashing into Finn. So the thing is that with the whole Holdo maneuver, where she uses light speed to do a whole like suicide attack against the whole like Starfleet or wherever it was, the bad guys of the movie with their ship and that, and it really does bad damage to their ship, and it begs the question, how come no one else in the Star Wars franchise before this movie ever used light speed to do that? How come the Rebels didn't just light speed their vehicles against the Death Star instead of doing that whole complicated, trench run and trying to hit the bullseye exactly where it was for their torpedoes, at least metaphorically torpedoes, to hit? And yeah, it just brings up like why this makes no sense. It brings up these inconsistencies. And then also, the logic of Rose crashing into Finn and being like, we're gonna win by saving those we love. And then the whole thing like blows up by the door. It looks like, I don't know, maybe the Resistance died or whatever, maybe objectively. And then she like inappropriately at that time kisses him.
Yeah.
And he was like, what? And then, as you earlier were saying about the whole stereotype thing about the kamikaze attack, that this movie also include a stereotype of saying that Asian people can't drive well or something by crashing into them.
I do recall,
or women, because the whole like attack with the Holdo crashing into
I was just gonna say, I do recall there was some comment about like, we're not beating the allegations with the driving, are we? No, but yeah, no, like. The suicide kamikaze pilot one I thought was particularly insane, but the purple haired lady driving the ship into the First Order, that didn't bother me as much. I thought that was cool. I can definitely think that there are problems of why wasn't this used before, et cetera, but I guess that kind of gets more into my issue of like the First Order felt like a bad fan fiction of the Empire, except explained poorly, and that got worse every time it was on screen. It kind of similar to Kylo, where it's like every aspect of the sequel trilogy was trying to be evocative image-wise of the original trilogy with Darth Vader and Sidious and the Empire, but it just got worse as time went on, and it was so just vacuous and didn't work, and the longer you saw it, the worse it got. It's like just every element of the suspenseful and dark aura in filmmaking and writing that Lucas understood. And even if you don't like the prequel trilogy, at least there was aura to it. In this one, even the ostensible aura just was falling apart all over the place. And that is worthy of study, because it's truly remarkable. And don't get me wrong, like I think you can make a case for why you would want to have that aura and then like break it down if it's done in an artistic manner. But this was not artistic. This was just incompetent. This was like clearly trying to evoke the old Star Wars for a new generation and just falling on your face over and over again. So yeah, I think that the First Order was not very good. I will give them also, I guess, their Death Star, but even bigger and better, guys, was like a cool display once, but it got pretty tired after that. And
yeah, Starkiller Base.
Yeah, Starkiller Base.
So number 7 would be not understanding the Force. Of course, it was quoted best in The Force Awakens.
That's not how the Force works.
So we see how in The Rise of Skywalker, how Force healing is a thing. So the question is, how come Qui-Gon Jinn didn't use the Force to heal himself when being stabbed by Darth Maul in The Phantom Menace? Or how come Anakin, aka Darth Vader, didn't use the Force to try to heal himself after his battle on Mustafar when he lost against Obi-Wan Kenobi? We also see how people can be teleported through the Force. So how come Palpatine couldn't teleport himself to help Darth Vader when he was losing his fight against Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar? And then also too, it's established that is a Force ghost as Yoda in The Last Jedi. He can summon lightning to, strike something, in the real world. So it also begs the question, if Force ghosts have this power, how come they couldn't use that to help anyone out later on? And just making up stuff on the fly brings up all these other inconsistencies later on. And you're wondering, like, how come they couldn't do that? They could do that the whole time. It's just bad writing.
Yeah, the Force I would actually put much higher on the, like, grievous sins of the sequel trilogy. As the franchise went on, and I guess you could say with the prequels being the beginning, they have certain advantages to break and rearrange the rules in weird ways, but in the sequel trilogy, there have been 6 films minimum, excluding, any other fan canons or things like the Clone Wars you want to add on to it, where the rules should be pretty set in stone, at least roughly. And they were just having a field day where things were not making sense consistently, and it really did just feel like very cheesy Deus Ex Machina moments a lot, especially in the sequel trilogy. I think, I'll just mention, even though this was like one of the worst aspects to me of the whole thing, the whole Leia scene in, I think it's The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
Where she gets ejected into space, opens her eyes and force pulls herself. That was the most cringe moment I've experienced in a film in the past decade. And I'm not even exaggerating. People may be like, "Oh, but no, I'm serious. Like, that was the closest I've ever been to I'm leaving this movie. This sucks." Like, it was that cringe-inducing of a moment, and it is largely a factor of that playing with the Force shtick. I think much lower on the totem pole, but like that were contributing problems that I would put before this, because the Force is such a big aspect of Star Wars, is just the inclusion of characters like Rose that were in The Rise of Skywalker that just felt unnecessary. The whole thing on that gambling planet.
Casino Planet, Canto Bite.
Well, I don't think it was horrendous. It was a very clear example of, like, you literally could have cut all of this and it would have been fine. Like, there's no reason for this to be here. So that I would probably say is a less egregious, but one I'd put as like a lower hanging fruit.
Yeah, I remember when that happened in the theater. I remember you put your arms up in the air like, why? I had that similar reaction at the end of the movie Babylon, where they were showing this montage of movies that was completely unnecessary and overly artsy and pretentious.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if everyone's seen that movie. I mean, I was the only one in the auditorium when I watched it. All right, so number 6, you brought this one up before, but technically I would put this in the category of not understanding the Force, but I decided to give it its own category and spot on the list. Would have to be Flying Leia. This is just idiotic, and they should have killed off Leia's character in that movie, especially for the fact that Carrie Fisher sadly passed away by that point in time. But they kill off the people who are alive still, and the character they kept alive was the one who sadly passed away. So they obviously gambled on the wrong horse on that one. I know you already explained the whole Flying Leia already, so I don't want you to double dip with that one. But if you want to respond, like, laughing like a, what I just said.
I am happy to, man. Like, that Leia thing was one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. And it is just hilarious in a sort of cosmic irony type of way that they literally chose the person that was going to die first, and then they choose, like, in real life, that Carrie Fisher died. And so they're stuck with this, like, terrible, like, CGI render potato for most of the rest of the movies, and, like, sound bites were used from her, but they could have used, I don't know, the cool characters, Luke or Han Solo, but no, let's just kill off Han Solo in the first one, which, to be fair, I'll give him that. I think it was effective for setting up Kylo Ren personally, but Luke was completely wasted, and I'm sure we'll get into that momentarily.
So at number 5, you're kind of mentioning about the First Order, would have to be the villains. So the villains in the sequel trilogy are mediocre, to put it lightly. So they have this character called Snoke, and they hype him up like, oh, he's basically the Palpatine of this trilogy. Who's he like? And then Rian Johnson's like, doesn't matter, so we're just going to kill him right then and there. And then it's revealed that Palpatine was, I don't know if he was the clone of the Palpatine, or if he was Palpatine and somehow survived at the end of of Return of the Jedi. And he's basically just there to milk nostalgia. And one of the dumbest lines ever in the Star Wars franchise.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
And then the opening crawl, the worst opening crawl ever, the dead speak. And then, of course, they use Fortnite to confirm the whole reason why Palpatine's alive, or whatever it was, that whole, like, speech that he gives across the galaxy. And yeah, I mean, it really does undo and really devalue the sacrifice that Darth Vader does to save his son in Return of the Jedi. And he does fulfill the prophecy. But I was like, nah, we're just going to bring him back in this one. And then also, aside from those guys, you have General Hux, who's basically a sci-fi version of a member of the Third Reich in space, in, like, episode 7, and then becomes basically the butt end of jokes in the 8th one as, like, a humorous punching bag, and 9th one is like,
I'm the spy.
What? You?
And even, like, minor ones, like, for example, the Knights of Ren were like, oh, who are these people? They just turned out to be, like, over-glorifying cannon fodder, and then Captain Phasma was, like, overhyped in the marketing, where she's barely in The Force Awakens. And then it's like, by the time she shows up in The Last Jedi, it's like, oh, I forgot you were supposed to be in this franchise. And then when that kamikaze attack happens, all those stormtroopers in that hangar bay are conveniently dead. But for some reason, Phasma and a few other stormtroopers are perfectly fine. But in that execution scene, they're trying to execute, like, Rose and Finn. They're, like, really close to them. And then when that kamikaze attack happens, they're, like, almost half a football field away. How did that happen?
Yeah.
Even the theater, I'm like, where's the logic in that? All right, so I'll let you respond to that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree that the villains, Snoke and Kylo had potential. Like, again, they had, with the setup, they could have done something interesting. And to be fair, even though The Last Jedi's ending was questionable with killing off Snoke, I think there was an opportunity there to branch off and do something different and make Kylo more effectively evil in a way that Darth Vader didn't succeed, that they could have done, but they didn't even do that correctly. They went off in a different direction. They made him good. They made Yoda go YOLO and burn down the rest of the Jedi Order. So, yeah, I would say that it was just it was completely schizophrenically handled. And I would say kind of along those lines in this spot, it was just like, why did any of the First Order need to exist? Why are all of these characters less competent versions of what we've already seen before? Like, you're mentioning General or Admiral Hux is...
General Hux.
General Hux was literally like Grand Moff Tarkin, except an intern. Like, just so many things about it looked cool, but were handled terribly in terms of substance. And none of the angles that could have made the sequel trilogy really stand. Like, not that you want to extrapolate to different franchises, but one of the things in the Marvel movies, which are also owned by Disney, that until Infinity War hadn't really been fixed, was this sort of, why do we care about your villains aspect, and these overlapped around the same time. So I think it was a similar issue of the villains are there to be there, but why they're there doesn't really matter. Just, aren't they scary? Actually, no, they're not. And then they kind of just get beaten, and what was this all for? It was a bad feeling. And then even the concept of the Force and like the thing we're ostensibly going with the Star Wars legacy with Luke and the lineage of the Skywalkers and everything that came before. Yeah, let's toss that shit in the fire and forget all about it, because like something norms, something oppression. Whee! And that was basically, I can understand having the Rian Johnson in the middle as a director may have complicated that a bit for, retconning and stuff, but boy, was even the attempts at retconning it so cringe-inducing, so poorly plotted out, and tonally just like, are we trying to put all of Star Wars from the visual to the characters to the themes in a blender and just completely trash the franchise that came before? And it's really sad. Like, I would honestly at this point, as we talk about it, prefer a rebooted sequel trilogy done by Lucas, and this whole sequel trilogy was a fever dream that was, like a rosebud moment. Just because, man, it's a train wreck.
Yeah, it ends with the cast of RLM like laughing demonically.
Yeah. They're just like counting money that they got bribed by Kathleen Kennedy or something.
They're like dancing with J.J. Abrams.
In fact, J.J. Abrams should have directed the prequels, and George Lucas should have directed people to their seats in the theater.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it did not age well.
Aged like milk.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like that milk that Luke was drinking on the planet.
Yeah, the green camel alien boob milk. Yeah, that was...
Yeah. So moving on to number 4 would be Finn was wasted. Looking back on The Force Awakens, Finn is my favorite character in this movie because he's most interesting. We never saw a stormtrooper defect before, so I was interested to see where they were going to take that character. But sadly, when we get to The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, he basically gets sidelined and basically is the equivalent of a lost puppy. And half his dialogue in The Rise of Skywalker is, "Rey!" And I imagine John Boyega would have liked to have episodes 8 and 9 redone again for his character to be fully realized. Because he was definitely wasted, and it is frustrating in retrospect that his character basically got nerfed.
Yeah, this for me, I think, is more on the less... I mean, it's still a problem, but it was not as big and pressing of the overall issues of the sequel trilogy to me personally. This is kind of along with Rose and the shipping of the relationships and stuff like that. For me, in this slot, I would personally say that Rey being a Mary Sue was probably like one of the biggest issues, and not even kind of a Mary Sue. By the end, she literally earned none of it. Like, it was all just given to her by the fact of her being the main character. There are some stories that have Mary Sue elements of male protagonists and female protagonists that I think as long as there's a few moments of struggle, I guess the closest you could say to that she came was in the first one against Kylo and then against Snoke. But as a whole, just like it was basically written off as like she's related to Palpatine, so that's why this all happened, and that just none of that worked at all. It was so unearned, so anticlimactic, and such questionable judgment. So I would put that over the Finn problem, but they're very much part of the same issue of character writing.
But speaking of, so number 3, Rey the Mary Sue Palpatine. So Rey is a character who's obviously, people have pointed out how if you look at her or Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character from the recent Indiana Jones movie or the protagonist from that Willow series that's no longer on Disney+, people have argued that if you look at these characters are kind of objectively surrogates for Kathleen Kennedy. All are white women with brown hair who in a way are kind of these self-inserts where Kennedy is trying to hijack these franchises that she didn't make, or at least she was not the creative brains behind it, like George Lucas or Steven Spielberg when it came to Indiana Jones, and she wants to hijack that narrative and make it about her as sort of a historical revisionism in a way. And Rey obviously is someone who is similar enough to Luke Skywalker, being someone who aspires for more. And they basically tell her, at least she's told this, the actress who plays her, was said that in The Force Awakens, she was told that maybe her lineage was Obi-Wan Kenobi.
And then it really went, there were like different versions, and then it really went to that she was no one. And then it came to episode 9, and JJ pitched me the film and was like, oh yeah, Palpatine's granddaddy. And I was like, awesome. And then 2 weeks later, he was like, oh, we're not sure. So it kept changing. So then even I was filming and I wasn't sure what the answer was going to be.
And yeah, it was just kind of all over the place in terms of that. But also the problem is that Rey never loses any fight or any conflict whatsoever. I don't know if you remember, but the thing is she's fighting Kylo Ren. I know some people try to excuse but Kylo Ren was injured when that happened. And I guess you can kind of right away that explain away. But the problem is that in Last Jedi she never loses against Luke Skywalker when they're doing a whole fight in that an argument, and that wasn't a serious fight, but still. And they're fighting that Red Guard, and she doesn't, of course, come close to losing any of that. And then when Rise of Skywalker, the closest she came to losing was in that movie, fighting against Kylo Ren. Leia did this whole Deus Ex Machina Force thing, which had Rey win. And yeah, she's just a bland, boring character in that regard because she doesn't really grow as a character. Everything's conveniently, she just accomplishes. I fixed the bypass compressor, whatever it was, in the Millennium Falcon. And then also the fact that she knows how to use the Force in terms of, a Jedi mind trick. And this is just bad writing. Because the thing is, when you write a character who's this powerful, it would make sense for Rey to be a villain than a hero, because the villain should be more powerful than the hero is. Because it's more impressive if the hero defeats the villain. And the way he wrote the character is that this does not work for the hero character. So in retrospect, it was just bad writing for Rey as a character.
Yeah, I fleshed out pretty much all of this in the point before, so I won't repeat myself, but I very much agree that not only was she just a Mary Sue, she was the biggest Mary Sue, and at no point, as time went on, it only got worse. That you would think that after hearing that criticism the first and the second time, by the third, you would try to, make some correction course on that as a writer, but they doubled down and made it worse every single time, which is just incredible and a bold... It's like being boldly arrogant in the wrong direction, that in a pretty amazing way to me. I guess at this point for me, it was just bringing Palpatine back in the manner physically at all. I think that was a huge misstep. I was open to during the trailers, like when you hear his voice, like, okay, could this be a thing where like it turns out that the whole plan for the First Order is like a lingering contingency plan from Palpatine, who is still dead, but like, you know, there's some remnants of what we knew from the old Star Wars still at play. And like, I'm not even opposed to Rey being the child of, or the grandchild of Palpatine, and that being a complicating factor, but just, it was the most surface level on all fronts. No, he's literally back. Snoke literally didn't matter. He wants to, I guess, I can't remember if it was take the body of his granddaughter and be her, or just like take her life energy, but
Yeah.
it was just the most cartoonishly bad depiction and choices you could have made with Palpatine, and not to mention the fact that it just completely invalidated Vader's sacrifice and the basically the whole 6 prior films, like the whole concept of the Phantom Menace, the fall of the Empire, and so the fall of the Jedi, the rise of the Empire, and then Vader's sacrifice to kill Palpatine. All of that, the whole story of Star Wars was just its heart carved out and put on the table for no good reason other than, I don't know, money. Like,
and identity politics, I imagine, too.
Yes, that is certainly a part of it as well. So, like, if you're gonna do a big thing like that, at least have a reason for it that in the story is kind of interesting, but it just failed on that front, and that to me is bordering, like, Star Wars isn't my sacred cow by any means, but like, I can imagine as a Star Wars fan that has gotta be, or like a mega fan, I mean, because I am a fan of Star Wars, but for mega fans that has gotta just be like sacrilege. So
Yeah, I think couple of quick things to wrap it up is that, well, for starters, I know that you're forgiving towards the actress who plays Rey, if you know what I mean.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. She's a cutie booty.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
Or maybe intended or something like that. Oh yeah, and this whole thing of trying to say like the Force is female, you know, that sort of deal with Kathleen Kennedy and try to make it more female centric. Guess what? So Ron Howard was interviewed about what he did on Solo Star Wars story. You know, he took over that movie after, you know, Lord Miller retired from that movie. And he talked to George Lucas because he worked with him on American Graffiti on advice. And you know what George Lucas said? Star Wars is for 12-year-old boys. So, yep, I just heard 1,000 Blair horns just, you know, sound off when I read that.
Yeah, no, it's, I don't know, like, it'd be interesting to see what a female Star Wars would look like. Would it just turn into Barbie? Like, you know, Luke and Leia and everyone actually survived and they're going to go paint their nails?
I don't know.
Like,
but moving on to number 2. The character assassinations of Luke, Han, and Leia. So, Luke Skywalker being character assassinated has been explained many times. I'm not going to overly explain that or just go over that because it's already been explained much better than other people. Han Solo was character assassinated in The Force Awakens because he had a nice progression of his character in the original trilogy, going from someone who was a smuggler who was selfish and out for his own to finding a cause to fight for and becoming selfless. But then he regresses as a character by being a smuggler, basically being a divorced loser in The Force Awakens. And then he just gives Millennium Falcon to someone he barely knows. I know people complain about some Disney animated movies like, oh, they fell in love and want to marry someone they just first met. And it's like, well, he gave the Millennium Falcon his prized possession to someone he barely knows, but you were perfectly cool with that. And then he dies the way like a villain dies, by being stabbed by that lightsaber by his son, and he falls to his death. Think about how many animated movies from Disney, or at least just movies generally speaking, where the villain falls to their death. So Han doesn't die like a hero, he dies like a villain. And then Leia is badly made in this trilogy too, because now she was supposed to be kind of overseeing this, and everything like fell apart with her leadership, which makes her look bad. I mean, not as obvious as like Luke and Han in terms of character assassinations, but she was definitely a character assassinated if you kind of critically look at these movies and how the Order of the Galaxy is supposed to be.
Yeah, I hear you on this. I think we disagree about the hierarchy of how much the characters were ruined. But so, like, for example, I think Han was probably the least ruined for me personally. Just because while definitely things were questionable about making him a divorced loser and stuff like that, I did at least think his death was effective towards the Kylo Ren character, which I'm sure some element of that probably, if Lucas was in charge, some version of that would be present and probably more effectively implemented. But really, Carrie Fisher as Leia, she shouldn't have been as present in it as she was, B, been killed off sooner, and C, just was not overly... She was made important on and off screen in ways that were unwarranted, except for kind of the identity politics angle that we talk about of, you know, the future is female empowerment stuff. And I'm not even opposed to all of that necessarily, but like, it was handled terribly. The actual actress died. You should have changed course, and it just that failed on its face. Just for like, I'll give that one that it at least kind of, while it was present, it was just kind of awkwardly there off to the side. Luke, though, was unexcusable, and as Tyler was saying, the character assassination of Luke, while other people can say it much better, and I'm sure have much more in-depth analyses of it, I think for me personally it goes along with kind of the Yoda and the Force aspect that just was handled like a grab bag of Deus Ex Machina, but then also the person that should be our greatest connection to the past, the previous protagonist that the audience is identifying as a legacy character, disrespected, effectively urinated on by, except, you know, alien boob milk. And then, while they could have done, and I could see like an interesting narrative out of like him being depressed for failing Kylo, it was still too at an arm's length to be, for us to really relate to it and feel in the same way as he did by the end of his film that he was in and then, you know, kind of pieced out. It just did not work for me, and it overall kind of gets into the main point I'm sure we'll basically unanimously agree on, but his character assassination in particular was especially sad because it just left me sitting there like, why? What is all of this for? All of this time and effort and money and attention is just to like see a burnout? Like, that's, I mean, you could do interesting things with that, but they couldn't even succeed on making an interesting burnout. It was just, and you can tell it's even bad because Mark Hamill himself, from like being asked questions after the fact and around during the production, he disagreed with the choices, and I think everyone who's honest with themselves can see why it was terribly disrespectful to the character. So I'm less concerned, and I think most people would agree, like, the political angle of it should be, while politics is a part of art, the way in which this was handled was so tasteless and so almost spiteful in a way that was so harmful and venomous towards the fan base. So I can really see why the Star Wars fan base since the 70s, when my mom saw it, would be so hurt, especially by Luke's portrayal of anything, that he kind of is the embodiment of the true fans being cast aside and left pathetically to wander their own franchise. It's really sad.
All right, so number one would have to be there was no plan. Because the thing is, there's a lot of mystique in The Force Awakens. Like, how do you get this lightsaber?
A good question. For another time.
It's like the same bad energy from Terminator Genesis, where it's like, who sent you back in time to do all this?
Those files have been erased.
Oh, that's convenient.
And it's basically the writers like, yeah, we have no idea where we're going with this. We're just being all gimmicky. We're pretending that we know what we're doing. And I remember back in my college years, the last year I was in college, was this guy saw The Rise of Skywalker, and he was asked, what did you think of it? And he said that the problem with that movie was that it felt like it was retconning things about The Last Jedi, but the problem with The Last Jedi was that it was retconning things about The Force Awakens. And yeah, the thing is, they just over-relied on nostalgia. They had no plan. They ignored the advice George Lucas had. He had an outline for what they could do with it, and they're like, nah, we're just going to go our own way with it, which they didn't have to legally do that, but it was definitely not good of them at all to do that, especially in hindsight looking at that. And also, too, I'm pretty certain that if they could do it all over again, they definitely would have made some changes. And I don't get why they couldn't just write the scripts out first and then shoot stuff. It wasn't like, with the Spider-Man movies where they only had like 5 years to make a movie and then they're going to lose the rights to it. They own the franchise, and there was probably pressure from the stockholders or members of the board. They wanted to get that Galaxy's Edge open at the Disney parks, and they wanted to see an immediate return investment, but it's debatable if they've ever turned a profit on the Star Wars franchise yet. I mean, obviously they have with the Marvel comic books purchase. They definitely have seen a return on investment on that easily, but it's debatable with the Star Wars franchise. And so overall, the biggest issue, we've kind of definitely chipped at this throughout the whole video, is that there was no plan. They just made things up and they went along. And that's bad. I mean, you can criticize the prequels in ways, even like the original trilogy, Lucas obviously made some changes here and there. Like, there wasn't like always a plan for Luke being the son of Darth Vader or Leia being Luke's sister. But overall, at least he had a plan somewhat in ways and kind of made alterations, but at least it was a clear vision by the creator of the franchise. The sequel trilogy was like, we're going to do our own thing, we're just going to overly milk nostalgia and just over-rely on the mystery box gimmick, which mostly has never paid off in any of J.J. Abrams' projects, except for kind of the new Mission Impossible movie, because he did direct the third one, which was like the rabbit's foot was the MacGuffin. They never fully explained what the rabbit's foot was in that movie, but the new Mission Impossible movie, they do explain what the rabbit's foot was. It was the other half of that dangerous AI in that movie. And I jokingly said that finally, a J.J. Abrams mystery box gimmick that actually paid off. Hallelujah. So, yeah, that's my biggest criticism, is that there was no plan. And just trickled down to all the other issues that I've already mentioned in this video, and of course Steven has had too with this whole trilogy.
Yeah, we're basically in agreement. As I'm sitting here thinking about it, I'm not sure if I would say the term is unplanned versus different contradictory plans that were just assumed to work and then didn't, so there were too many cooks in the kitchen. But regardless, it was the same effect of it just didn't work. There were so many subversions, and not in a good way, of just like betrayals to the core themes and characters and universe that had been set in that was part of George Lucas's universe that he set up. So that really is the biggest grievance. It's the writing, and one of the biggest examples that you can see that I think you could argue is kind of part of that arc, and I'm not even opposed to this, like, to be clear. There are some people that may be against this, but between Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker, there was, with the ending of The Last Jedi, this sort of almost democratizing of the Force to actually the story isn't just about the Skywalker family anymore. This is about everyone. And it's like, okay, that's a bold and interesting way to take this. Some people may not like it, but you can say at least it's different. Where are we going to go with this? Actually, never mind. What are you doing? Like, that is just such a psychotic way to handle it, and you're not even going to, like, try to integrate it in. It really did feel like just a bunch of, and I say this being involved in fan filmmaking myself, but like a bunch of the worst fan film ideas you could put together consecutively, and just a bastardized version came out with no real principles other than like, yeah, I guess this is vaguely set in Star Wars and a mess happened that was kind of similar to what happened before. Maybe you can take something away from that, and there's a more independent anarchist version of the Force that's around now, but that's at best, and I hardly think that was their intention from this. I think this is kind of just the ashes of what remains and apologists trying to make the best out of a turd sandwich. So I think that the writing, this is a classic example of study for do not do this. Going forward, if you are in charge or you want to get into creative writing and filmmaking, study this thoroughly as for what not to do, and understand that you do need a better understanding, and profit does not constitute enough of a reason to betray the writing and the themes, and it will destroy your product, your branding, and the art by the end of it.
Yeah, it's kind of similar how you can look at the 2017 remake of The Mummy and how to not begin a cinematic universe.
Yes.
But yeah, so closing thoughts is that I get the argument when people say that throughout time people will be defending the sequel trilogy as much as people are defending the prequels now. I can see the people who are younger than us who grew up watching these movies and may defend them, but it's a much harder uphill battle to defend the sequel trilogy compared to the prequels. Was that unlike the prequels that were done by George Lucas, and throughout time people realized the creative decisions he was doing and what the story he was trying to tell, with the through line being A, the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader, B, the rise of Palpatine becoming the Emperor, and C, when it comes to like the historical context, how a representative government, whether it be a democracy or a republic, becomes a dictatorship, is what that through line is of the prequel trilogy. And of course, the original trilogy was classic heroic stories of hero's journey and about the tales of father and sons, which is, as you would say, a tale as old as time. Mm-hmm. But the sequel trilogy is it's just kind of all over the place. Like, you had J.J. Abrams had his ideas, and then Rian Johnson has something completely different in mind without really much consulting with the people at Disney, just did whatever. So then Abrams comes in and tries to salvage and try to steer the ship back to his direction, and it end up pleasing nobody. So anyway, this is Tyler from Incredible Reviews.
And Steven, aka The Big Steve, on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok.
And I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you disagree with us or agree with us, please leave a comment in the comment section to give your thoughts on what we have said in this video. And also, people are mentioning too that if The Force Awakens, which of course is 10 this year, if that was re-released in theaters this year, it wouldn't even do the same amount of numbers that Revenge of the Sith had for its 20th anniversary this year, which I remember going to see that in the big screen, and I remember having a fun time from start to finish. I had a smile on my face the whole time. Just loved seeing that movie on the big screen again, and a lot of people showed up to that one.
Yeah, I would be curious about The Force Awakens in particular, but it is undeniable that Rise of Skywalker or The Last Jedi, they definitely would not make as much as Revenge of the Sith, or even The Phantom Menace, probably, if it was re-released.
Well, it was re-released.
Well, no, you're right. I mean...
Phantom, yeah.
What I mean is, side by side to compete.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty clear that there is, for all of its faults, a better nostalgic grasp of the culture on The Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith than anything but maybe The Force Awakens, and that's a maybe. Just because, like, I don't know, at the time it started off as, okay, this is fine. But, yeah, it really, I agree with you that there are a lot of films and franchises that have made bold decisions that were not respected at the time and didn't succeed financially, but as time goes on will be looked back fonder. And the sequel trilogy is the example of just the opposite, where it was made with the current time in mind, and it will age. It's already aged like milk and will not last the span of time for it.
So anyway, we hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe.